Welcome to this edition of the Boon of Wireless podcast, coming to you high above the streets in northern New Jersey at ANJ Media. Yes, New Jersey. We may have been the third state to join the union, but New Jersey had the first radio station in the United States and the first drive-in movie theater, the first shopping mall, the first nuclear power plant. We have the world's largest water tower and the first ever traffic light. Anyway, the first submarine was built in New Jersey and launched in the Passaic River in Paterson. Does that make you want to move here? Don't. I'm your host, Jon Horovitz, founder and president of Atrium Unlimited Consulting. Our guest on the program today is a serial entrepreneur and unicorn co-founder with a knack for startups in the electronics, recycling, and sustainability space. Mindful that our fragile planet needs all the help it can get, he likes to be involved in anything that promotes common sense solutions that benefit people and the environment. Seth Heine tells us that the best part of his role as CEO of Prolog Mobile is watching how it all comes together. The ideation of something no one has ever done before, getting to work with what he thinks is pound for pound the most capable operations and development team in our industry. As Prolog Mobile enters their 6th year of business, they have already achieved the main thing that they set out to prove, which is that mobile device data can be leveraged to improve efficiencies for the hundreds of millions of devices that go through the circular economy every year. This is profound facts on how most people around the world access technology. Seth specializes in marketing, business development, product development, strategy, and building companies, organizations, and movements, and fundraising. That's angels and venture capitalists, not bake sales. He also has extensive experience writing and developing patents across multiple categories. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the program Seth Heine. Seth, how are you today in Boulder, Colorado?
I am well today, John. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
It's good to see you. I know that both you and I are leaving for Spain tomorrow. This will be shown after Mobile World Congress in Barcelona in about 2-3 weeks, but you and I are both going to hopefully have a good time in Mobile World Congress. So why don't we just jump right into it, okay? Let's talk about Prolog Mobile. Talk to me a little bit about your company's role in the wireless ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. We started Prolog Mobile 7 years ago, identifying the need for the use of data in the reverse supply chain in order to help people more intelligently manage devices into the furtherance of extra life cycles. Prolog,
meaning people that are buying, which has exploded, refurbished, previously owned, certified. There's so many different monikers that people put on what used to be a used phone. And before we go a little bit further, if you don't mind, if I could ask, this segment of our business has just exploded over the last 5 years. Can you pinpoint what happened, or was it pricing on the new models, or?
it's a good thing, and it's a lot of influences or things coming together all at once that have really caused this growth. New device sales in general have been lowering or tapering downwards for some time. I think 2023 was exceptional in that I think the industry grew a modicum over the previous year, but we sort of hit, as my business partner John Newman says, peak wireless a couple of years ago. And I guess the driver for that is that a lot of people don't really want to buy a new phone necessarily for a better screen experience or a better camera. And new phones are very expensive. Folding phones are like $2,500 for people that want to sort of get that throwback feel and spend thousands of dollars doing it. The other thing so that speaks to a diminishing supply of phones. On the other side of this, more and more people around the world are needing access to mobile devices. They're super important in how everybody runs their lives, whether you're in the developing world or whether you're in northern New Jersey or Manhattan. People find phones indisposable. And so the long tail, if you will, of devices that go through life cycles have an almost endless amount of demand for those phones. And to put it into statistical terms, I think the wireless industry is contracting generally at 1 or 2% a year from peak phone. But the used, refurbished, certified, pre-owned, whatever, it's a used phone. That industry, or that part of the industry, is growing at about 10% a year. And I guess I would point out that if they're all used phones, a CPO phone, certified pre-owned, indicates that that phone has actually been de-risked, right? Somebody has bought that, checked it out, made sure the battery and screen is good. If it wasn't, fixed it, blister packed it, and got it ready to a consumer. So it feels like a standard retail experience. So it's not like buying a phone from somebody out of the back of their car to Starbucks or something and not really knowing what's happening there. And then it sort of goes down to gradations, right?
That's right. That's where I normally shop, is in the parking lot of Starbucks. But yeah, thank you. But let's be clear. Prolog Mobile does not deal in the used handset business. You're more of what I've heard. Prolog being described as the Carfax for the phone's identification system, the IMEI. Is that a fair assessment?
It is a fair assessment. Everybody sort of seems to see that in our business. It's on many levels, it's accurate. A Carfax, if you think about it in abstract, is just a bunch of data telling you what's up with this car, who bought it, who crashed it, who fixed it. In this regard, it's backwards looking. Our data is both backwards looking. Has this phone been on a network? Was it subsidized or locked on a network? Did it leave that network without paying its bills? This industry has a curious tendency that's generally illegal, frankly, in Europe, to lock a phone off a network if the human didn't pay the bills. Carriers here in the United States punish the inanimate device to make sure that that device doesn't feel welcome on their network. And that means that a AT&T phone that's perfectly functional on AT&T, might even be branded as an AT&T phone, won't work on AT&T anymore. So our system not only looks backwards to understand what locks or encumbrances have been put on the phone, but it is also forward facing in order to help people understand, here's the device status, as we call it, of that phone, and you can't use it on AT&T again. But it might be compatible with T-Mobile, or it might be compatible with hundreds of other networks around the world. And since it won't work on AT&T in this example, here are your best options moving forward in order to help get that device more efficiently back into reuse.
Okay, so my lawyers behind the glass with Andrew, our producer, are waving their hands. We're using AT&T as an example. Okay, so let's not get everybody upset here. Going back to the market, I know.
Nothing personal.
Going back to the marketing piece of it, years ago, I believe it was T-Mobile, when they first came out as the uncarrier, said no more contracts for our postpaid, and everybody followed that. And what they did, as you probably know, and if our listeners don't, they started giving you a free phone, where instead of a 2-year contract, you now had a 3-year lease contract, where you would get, for example, a $22 charge on your monthly bill and then a $22 credit. So the phone was on us, but was it? And if you ever wanted to leave that carrier for another carrier for whatever reason, coverage or any number of other reasons, you may switch carriers, you couldn't leave until you pay that phone off. So the whole no contract thing became we've now locked you in because of your handset device. And I'm sure you deal with that on a daily basis.
We deal with that literally about 1 million times a month. Okay. It's a really popular question.
Okay, good. That's good. Okay. So when did you realize, when you and John Newman, your partner, sat down, when did you realize there was for no better word, a need for a deep dive on the IMEIs, again, which identify each phone? When did you say, okay, we have an opportunity here. There's a problem. We've identified it. We've come up with a solution. What was the shining moment that said, aha?
Yeah, there was an explicit genesis moment for Prolog Mobile. At some point in 2017, I was involved in a business that was wholesaling phones. And we did a deal with, as I recall, like $1 million worth of iPhone 7Ss. And I happened to have been in Texas in the facility when the phones came in. And long story short is I wanted to inspect the phones, and my partner said they're already sold. They're not our phones anymore. It was what in this space is called a dock bounce. we'd bought the phones and already sold them before they had landed. So literally the pallet came in, was wheeled to another bay, slap a label on it. Those phones were going to Dubai. And they left a half hour later. And I was chiding my partner at the time. I said, we should look in there and make sure this is either not $2 million worth of phones or $500,000 worth of phones or nuts and bolts or dead mobsters or dog kibble. Like what's in the box? And he, said, you're basically wanting to read other people's mail. They're not our phones anymore. And I said, it feels really important to me. We would know what we bought with the $1 million and, what's the value of the box. And long story short, we never looked in the box. And I had this epiphany, sort of a low-hanging epiphany, not a really remarkable epiphany. But I realized we didn't really know what had happened, right? We'd made some money. But we didn't know if we'd made, whether we could have made twice as much money or whether there's going to be some huge complaint, like there's not even phones in this box. You've sent us bunch of whatever it is. And I realized, well, if we as the seller don't know what happened, then the buyer doesn't actually know what they bought. And for an industry that is at least perceived as to be as sophisticated as the wireless industry, like I think we're all clear that your latest, greatest phone probably has more technology than the, rockets that put men on the moon, right? Like that thing's more capable than what NASA had at their fingertips in order to get that done. And yet there's this weird dynamic that the data, people don't track the data on the phones. They don't relay that data from buyer to seller. And the business model for this industry is that there are usually 10 to 12 transactions involved in a phone in its journey to get it back into reuse. So somebody had to buy it, somebody had to process it, somebody had to repair it, and somebody had to resell it. And the rest are all wholesalers who bought a bunch of phones. Maybe they skimmed some phones off the top that they wanted, maybe so, maybe not, but they charged their markup. And you then realize not only is it economically inefficient, but there's no data that's relaying with these phones. So every time somebody buys the phones, in this case, whatever, 5 or 7 wholesalers, none of them knew what they bought. None of them really explained to people what it is you're buying. And as we all learned in economics class, risk destroys value. And I looked at this and said, well, these are valuable devices. But there's all this risk. There's a huge perception of risk. It's actually a lot of very real forms of risk in that. And you can actually strip those away for pennies on the dollar and de-risk something and make it either profoundly more valuable or make that journey back into reuse much more efficient. And that was ultimately where we realized, okay. Somebody should do something about this. And if not us, who? So be the change you want to see in the world. And as entrepreneurs, we got into action.
Good. Well, I have to quote Brad Pitt in the movie Seven when it got to Dubai. What was in the box? Okay.
Yeah.
It's a reference for your younger people to check out a good movie. Anyway, what was in the box?
We still don't know.
You still don't know. So it could have been nuts or bolts or Jimmy Hoffa. We don't know what was in the box. Okay. So what are some of the issues that Prolog Mobile solves for your customers? You are going to order 1,000, 5,000 handsets, and you want to know about those handsets before you purchase them. So what does Prolog Mobile do for that customer?
Yeah. As a point of differentiation, I should have mentioned this in that last bit. We never own a phone. We don't touch phones. We don't own phones. We just do data that helps people understand what is it, what's it worth, and what's next, which is our little marketing tagline. And so there's all these forms of risk. A phone could be locked on a network, off a network. It may have been lost or stolen. We're a partner with GSMA on their block list. Taking a further step back, that sort of informs the device's status. We were recently awarded a patent for a new capability called device compatibility that, in short, and I can of course elaborate on this, but in short, it helps understand the radios present on a phone and what networks that phone will work efficiently on in a next life cycle. One of the big problems that we have in this industry is hidden under the make and model, I call it a monolith, but everybody thinks that there's somehow only a small number, or maybe just one Samsung, whatever, I'm making this up, but Note S20 Ultra. They think that there's just a couple of those phones running around. But in the world of Android, Samsung and all the Android manufacturers tend to make phones on a customized basis for carriers, and that phone works great in that first life cycle. But then it gets taken back through a Apple take back program, Samsung's take back program, Best Buy's, whatever. There's all these take back programs. And then they all end up on a shelf, and then they end up being commingled and then sold. And so whoever buys that next box of phones buys what I like to call a random box of chaos, in that there might be 15 or 20 different modem variations in there. And if you think it's all the same phone and then you sell them to somebody who has that same fundamental misunderstanding, a lot of those phones don't activate, and nobody really understands why they don't. They don't necessarily want to deal with returns, and this destroys the value of the phones.
Right.
And so much so that there are a lot of companies that we work with in the buy, sell, global trade of these phones that will only deal with Apples. They won't deal with Android phones at all, because a lot of those phones don't activate, and nobody seems to understand why. And that's why. But, Android phones are something like 70% of the phones on this planet.
Right.
So said another way, there's 7 billion phones on the planet, 4 billion plus of those are Samsungs. And so you've got a real problem with a value proposition. You have an economic problem, and you have an environmental problem. If 70% of the world's phones are being, either shelved or destroyed or landfilled or whatever, but not going into reuse, it destroys tens of billions of dollars worth of value every year. It deprives billions of people of their next device for them to do an upgrade and move on with their lives. And it just has all these profound ramifications. So that's the sort of things we set out to solve over here.
You mentioned returns. I've dealt with a lot of wholesale master agents throughout my career, and the rule was the warehouse door only swings one way. We'll ship stuff out, but we won't take it back. So if a client of yours was implementing Prolog's programs and knew ahead of time that out of these 2,000 phones or 10,000 phones that X amount weren't going to work, that obviously affects the sale.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And it's not fair to say they won't work. It's it's fair to say they won't work where, or ask where they won't work where. Right. So if those phones came off a network, we have 100 plus carriers in the United States. Everybody seems to think we have 3 because they do all the advertising. But in fact, there's literally 100 carriers in the United States. That is companies that own customers, towers, billing systems, phones, like they're proper carriers, but they're really, really small. When they buy those phones, they work in that instance. But and here's a visual, so make use of the camera here, I suppose. But when those phones are sort of born on a network, there's a really good fit between a device and the network. And then phones don't evolve, right? The radios are baked into a chipset, but networks evolve. We all remember there was 2G, and then there was 3G, and then there was 4G. Now there's 5G. And you can see now that the phone isn't really fitting with that network much. The network is a living, breathing, evolving, dynamic entity. Phones are static. So those phones, they don't go bad over time, but the quality of fit and the efficiency of service goes bad. And so that's the latest big, hairy problem, if you will, that we've been solving over here, is understanding, well, that phone still has the radios that were on it, since day one. Where else on the planet are they running those radios on their network so that phone can efficiently go back into reuse and won't be returned with an unhappy customer?
Okay. So who is Prolog's customer? Is it the carriers, the MVNOs, end users, all the above?
It really is all of the above, but in general, our customers are the biggest insurance companies in the world, who happen to be the biggest buyers and sellers of phones in the world. that may come as a surprise to your listeners
No,
and
well,
viewers.
yeah. It doesn't come as a surprise to me because when you are with one of the big carriers or the manufacturers and your phone needs to be replaced, you normally get a refurbished pre-owned phone, which comes from one of the big insurance carriers.
Right. That's exactly
Uh,
right. The
yeah,
replacement phone dynamic is what drives
right.
that.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense that, why is an insurance company
yeah.
buying billions of dollars worth of phones every year? We work with
Okay.
manufacturers. We certainly work with carriers. We work with MVNOs on those carriers.
Right.
I saw that your last guest was Adam from Enwita, and
Right.
we just launched a consumer facing application with them that basically helps a consumer understand, to your earlier question, very much like a
Mm-hmm.
Carfax. If
Mm-hmm.
I buy this phone, what carriers will it work on, so I know where to take it? We can answer that in the positive or the negative, but it usually is answered in the positive. Here's where you should activate that phone, and don't activate it on these other carriers because you'll have a bad
Good.
experience. Or
Right.
they may not allow it on their network or whatever.
And the small business owner that's one of Nuita's clients or members of his association doesn't have the ability to fight back if he gets 10 phones that 5 don't work. What's his recourse? They're not
Yeah,
gonna listen to him like
I
they would with a larger company.
I hear the resolution, finger quotes for the listeners here, of that.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, there's really only two ways to accommodate that. You either take a return, an RMA as it's known, and then you send
right,
somebody another phone off the shelf, which is like roll a dice. That may or may not
yeah,
have the
right.
radios they want. Nobody's articulating this question or answer,
Yeah,
so that there's risk, in short, in that. Or, and this surprises me as I say it, and note that it's 2024, but as often as not, the person does not want the phones back. You said these doors roll, only open one way, and that's phones
right.
going out. We don't take the phones back. Well, in that case, if the seller says, I don't want the phone back, the buyer just learned that I'm either not buying phones from you anymore,
Mm-hmm.
or there was a
Yeah.
20% fallout rate, and I'm going to give you 80 cents on the dollar. So the next time I buy
Yeah.
10 phones and only 8 of them work, I got this sorted because I didn't pay you for 2 of
Yeah.
those phones. And I'll tell you, I had a conversation at CES a couple months ago with a huge company who shall not be named, but they recognized that there was a 20% fallout rate ish in all of these phones that they send out the door, because they're not tracking radios and they're not differentiating the inventory in a way where you can do specific fulfillment. But this company moves millions of phones around a year, tens of millions, in fact. And as I pointed out to them, then you're basically telling me you're giving away hundreds of thousands of phones every quarter. And they said, well, that's the business model. We're really busy. And, the sort of wholesalers and the rest of the channel has this sorted. Frankly, my mind was blown that you're just shoveling millions of dollars of phones out the door and not getting paid for them. And you're comfortable with that answer. This data solves that. So you're got people paying top dollar for every phone, and it works for them and they're happy. That's a
Yeah.
better
Okay.
world.
Right. It sounds like from our conversation here, Seth, that Prolog does a whole lot more than just analyze the IMEIs of the phone. Let's talk about mobile device data and why does that matter?
Yeah, the mobile device data indicates everything from accurately telling you it's this make, model, color, memory of phone. If you're listing phones on Bstock or Amazon or eBay, as a person who's a power seller in this industry, listing accuracy is really important. Again, being able to tell the customers, here's where this phone will work, or here's where it won't work. That's typically done within a market. Like in the Enwita example, that's, I think, just a United States and Canada facing instrument, but we can do this for somebody who's in Greece or Brazil or Zimbabwe or Japan. The data at this point, we track hundreds of carriers through these emulators and have gotten very, very good at improving this alignment. And so as we look for other business models where how can you create value or remove risk and inefficiency and create value? What are other applications for this device compatibility? And we're finding lots and lots of them.
Does the data evolve over time?
In many cases, the data does evolve. Yeah. Um, depending on, for example, if a phone was sold into a kiosk or a buyback system, and that phone, a lot of times that phone doesn't belong to the person who sold that phone. It's actually owned by some bank or insurance company, and they're making payments. Said another way, I don't know that T-Mobile or Verizon or AT&T own many phones at all. They do not own hundreds of millions of phones. That is somebody else's problem on an asset sheet that is not that's not theirs. So, the impact on the value of those phones varies depending on the radios on the phone. If the person didn't pay the bill on that phone but sold it into a system, that phone typically 60 or 90 days later, its status with that carrier will change. And so that could mean that somebody got a phone that in a month or two all of a sudden stops working on a carrier because the last person didn't pay the bills. So that part's dynamic. As I was explaining about the device compatibility bit, again, the radios and the phones don't change, but the networks do. So, for example, the system that we're announcing this next week or supporting its launch at GSMA or at Mobile World Congress with GSMA also helps a carrier understand, do I want this phone on my network at all? Like, is that an efficient phone, or is it going to make a customer crazy and they're going to call our customer service people and complain that we have a crappy network when it's not the network, it's this phone that just doesn't have the right radios? This data can also help them understand, as I shut down 3G in better support of 4G or 5G, is that phone going to stop working in 60 or 90 days? Can I actually anticipate customer service issues and head those off at the pass and make sure that we either don't allow the device on the network or are super clear on the fact that that phone's not going to work well at some point in the future, and how it is that you would support the customer through that. Like, come in, we'll want to buy your phone, get you into a new phone, that kind of thing.
A couple of years ago, the buzzword was 5G. Now the buzzword is AI, artificial intelligence. That's all you hear. Actually, one of my, I don't want to say counterpart, but Fierce Telecom put an article out this week that said what we're looking forward to at Mobile World Congress, top 10 things. 8 of them were artificial intelligence, and the other 2, one was coffee and one was cheese. So they're going to try to find out what the culinary delights are in Barcelona. Does artificial intelligence phones do anything to change the impact of your data or not?
Absolutely. Artificial intelligence, this reminds me of back in the day, dating myself here a little bit, but there used to be these things called really powerful computers on desktops. And then people moved to what was called a thin client. And this is sort of akin for maybe the younger people of the concept of the cloud does a lot of the work and the device itself doesn't have to do a lot of the work. Obviously, if the cloud is doing a lot of work, you have to have a very, very robust network, and that device is communicating with the network efficiently. When you push some of the processing over to the phone, you've sort of shifted the balance of power, but that phone, while it's maybe pushing less stuff through the network, what you're pushing through the network still tends to be bigger amounts of data. And long story short, that device network fit and the efficiency of that becomes even more important than it is now. Like AI phones just demand a good network fit.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. What have you seen in the space of the world you operate in? Interesting developments in the market lately.
The talk about AI phones is interesting because it's interesting. So this will cause people to go buy phones. If you've not been able to convince somebody that they need a better phone because the screen is better, or maybe the screen is bigger, or the camera is better, the promise of AI on a phone will probably, it'll certainly motivate the early adopters in the crowd to go get the latest and greatest phone. I don't know that the average consumer really understands AI in order to fully understand what I just talked about means. But what it means to a consumer is that the apps will start doing a lot more work for you and be a whole lot handier and a lot more accurate and faster. And that will absolutely drive the uptake of phones, which means they'll be selling more new phones. It means more perfectly good phones right now that are being replaced by an AI phone become available to the marketplace, and those phones will be trafficked globally. The United States is the biggest exporter of used phones in the world. I don't understand that. Like, it seems to me it should be Europe. They have more people, and I think of them as being more environmentally conscious. But for whatever reason, we outproduce them, with used phones, probably by a ratio of 3 to 1. So as we adopt AI phones, this will just cause probably a tsunami in scale of new phones entering the reverse supply chain and then trickling down into the rest of the markets around the world.
That's interesting. You would think that would be the other way around. All right. Well, so when this airs, this podcast airs, we'll be back from Mobile World Congress, hopefully, in Barcelona. And so prior to you going this week, what are you expecting to see that's new at Mobile World Congress?
I'm always really keen to, number one, as we just talked about, understand what's going on with devices. As a gadget guy, I just think they're pretty cool. And I'm always impressed with I'm impressed with what they do with handsets every year. That may not motivate, other people to go upgrade their camera or their phone or whatever and spend hundreds or thousands of dollars to do it. Networks are always evolving. Very much on my mind is the implications of AI and how this will translate into consumer stuff. Again, I don't really see consumers spending a lot of money on a phone because it has AI. I expect them to spend more money on that phone because it does more for them. And so seeing how people are going to use AI and all of those capabilities in the furtherance of a better user experience, like, it's probably not unrealistic to think about your phone really can become your assistant or a secretary, at some point for you to start managing things like calendaring or hotels or your flights or things like that. Like, that's not far off.
Okay.
And so if you think about what that means for your average consumer to all of a sudden sort of have like an employee that's doing some of these mundane tasks for you, that's a game changer. That's a really big deal.
That is. And I'm sure the carriers will figure out a way to monetize that. So
you bet they will. That's their job.
Let's wrap up. Looking ahead, what are the key trends that you anticipate that will have the most significant impact on how people purchase pre-owned or refurbished phones? And then as a follow-up to that, how is Prolog Mobile preparing to address these trends?
I'm trying to be a little codey here, but we have some products in development that will leverage this device compatibility capability and bring huge efficiencies to the markets in general. Again, if 10 or 20% of the devices being sold at any given time are failing on activation and you can solve that, you've just created 20% value in an industry that's estimated to be worth about $100 billion. You've just sort of magically created tens of billions of dollars. So that's really profound. As I said, I think AI phones will probably help with the sale of new phones. Maybe new phone sales will incrementally grow. I see forecasts to that effect. But what really is going to happen is through the use of our technology, the phones that are already out there are going to be able to go through multiple additional life cycles. They may need replacement parts or, fixed screens as it goes from one owner to another. But we see iPhones typically serving 5 life cycles or more. And we see Androids serving 2. So the ability to literally improve that efficiency for hundreds of millions of devices translates into a better mobile experience for billions of people over the next couple of years, ultimately helping them get better phones more efficiently, improves their quality of life. You actually see this in the GDP of countries in the developing world. The more mobile devices and the more efficient mobile devices they have increases the power of their economy. So it translates into money that, that's like table stake stuff. Like that's more food on the table created through these. So, as you sort of think about, those are really big statements I just made, and the ramifications as it impacts hundreds of millions of people. I find that really, really interesting and exciting.
Interesting. And is this, and again, I'm going to close out the session here. Don't need to get too deep into this, as right to repair starts proliferating through more and more states. It's going to ease that process of the 5 or 6 people that touch it to be able to actually open up the phone and work on it, where a lot of states right now don't allow that. So that could be the subject of another hour and a half. But Seth, I'm a buyer in the industry. How do I reach Prolog Mobile?
We are at prologmobile.com, have a website, of course. Start there. Of course, if you have a friend or you want to call me anytime, I'll be happy to field the call. But in general, we're available online. Of course, have sales and marketing teams. And just to the point you were just making, I'll circle back and say it yet again. Our data increases the confidence people have in devices. So they're more interested in buying a refurbed phone or a CPO phone. They know that it has less risk. They'll pay more money for it. And when they have a good experience, they'll tell their friends about it. And so it's, it just has a direct impact on the channel all the way down to the endpoint consumer.
Good. So what I learned today is that, let the buyer beware. There are tools out there to help you make data-driven decisions on purchasing previously used phones out there. And if you're not using a company like Prolog, you can only blame yourself. Seth, I want to thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. I learned a lot. I hope our listeners and viewers learned a lot. Again, that's prologmobile.com. And I want to thank you for spending the time with us. And we'll see you soon, I hope. And that'll wrap up another episode of the Boon of Wireless. We will see you next time. Thanks a lot.